Okay, Dave or Monica, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Welcome everybody to our Ordinance Advisory Committee meeting today. Dave's going to lead the presentation, but we are gearing up for a April 15th submittal. He'll talk through some of the content, but just a reminder, our plan going forward is that this will be the last kind of larger effort text amendment. We're not considering a cleanup, which is why we're coming to you all with the content and some of the things that will be in it. So it'll be filed in April, and then we'll follow a process past that to adoption. And then after that, we'll be moving to a maintenance schedule where we'll be doing every 6 months or so, we'll be doing a text amendment that kind of combines the cleanup and policy things into one. So I also wanted to just special note before Dave takes over that today is Alan and Laura's last Ordinance Advisory Committee meeting with us. Tomorrow is their last day at the City of Charlotte. They'll be retiring. We thank you both for all your hard work. This is like we had a staff meeting this morning. We have things all day. It's like a big hurrah for Laura and Alan. And so we really appreciate all the years of work, both on the UDO and the many other initiatives that they've both worked on over the course of their careers at the city. And we wish them well in their future travels. I think both of y'all have travel coming up and future travels and just all of the amazing, wonderful things that come with retirement. So with that, we'll get to the presentation. I think, oh, sure. Tony, did you have something?
Just point of personal privilege, since I've chaired the commission for 3 years and chaired this committee for a long time and worked with Alan and Laura since at least 2011, if not before, through the UDO and all the other things that were related to that and the work on the commission. I just felt like I had to say thank you. So thank you all. That's it.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Tony. Appreciate it. It's been nice working with you.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That's really appreciated. And I wasn't planning on doing a big thing, but I feel like it's a very celebratory day. So I wanted to make sure you all knew as being a part of this group. So I'm glad that we were able to do that. I think so. If there are no other questions, I'm gonna turn it over to Dave in my square of boxes and videos for him to take over and talk us through the text amendments.
Great, thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. We've got just a couple topics to talk to you about, so don't think we'll take as maybe our normal full block of time that we've had in the past. We've had lots of different topics. We do anticipate some upcoming conversations with y'all on some additional items that we'll just kind of highlight towards the end of this presentation. But we want to talk to you about two topics today, bringing back some insight on research campuses and talking about some different changes to better facilitate some of the opportunities and economic development opportunities for what's typically referred to as life science campuses. So we certainly will go through some of that with y'all, and then want to also bring back some updates on some affordable housing initiatives that we've talked with y'all about in the past that were possibly regulatory in nature. We do have a little bit of change of direction in some of that, which we'll go over with you guys, and hopefully everybody will get some insight as to the benefits of making a little bit of a shift in approach on some of the things we talked about with y'all when it comes to affordable housing and some of the initiatives we've been working on to get some better outcomes there. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to go through some of the research campus stuff, and then I'll jump back in and walk us through some of the updates on the affordable housing initiative. So Kevin, if you want to jump in, I will kick it over to you. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. And kind of piggybacking on what Dave said, we've had this ongoing concern with some missed opportunities for economic development, and the current UDO language makes developing research and development projects having light industrial components a challenge.
And as Dave said, that challenge really contributes to missed economic development opportunities for the city and ends up ultimately pushing potential projects that would have interest in developing in Charlotte to competing markets. So staff has put together an initial framework to address these concerns, and really the desire is to accomplish closing that gap of that challenge and try to do so as easily and cleanly as possible in the UDO. And part of the framework that we've put together to do this is to introduce a new use that would be included in the UDO. We're terming this research and development R&D with a light industrial component. So it's kind of a take and a spin off the current use in the UDO of research and development. And it borrows heavily from the current definition of that existing use, research and development, but we've made a little bit of modifications to try to add some clarity and be very very forward and transparent with what we're trying to accomplish with this new use. And as you can see here, as I said, the proposed definition borrows heavily on the existing definition, but some of the additions that we've done are marked here in bold. And we really wanted to kind of bring to the surface that we're trying to do this in a way that encourages also life sciences development and economic opportunities for the city of Charlotte. And this new use would also include a light industrial component for the manufacturings of products that are derived from this new use. Additionally, this initial framework we're proposing be allowed with prescribed conditions in 5 zoning districts: the OFC, RC, ML1, ML2, and IMU zoning districts. We do have some potential prescribed conditions. A general overview you can see here through some of these bullets. These would address area devoted to office uses in the ML1 and ML2. They would address outside storage, which is proposed to be prohibited in the IMU, OFC, and RC zoning districts. They would address area devoted to those light industrial components that we're trying to encourage with this new use in the IMU, OFC, and RC zoning districts, and address separation and screening where outdoor storage and light industrial components may be when it's located in the ML1 and ML2 zoning districts. And as I had mentioned earlier, really this approach is kind of an hybridization of a couple of uses already in our UDO, really leaning heavily into the existing research and development R&D zoning use, as well as our light industrial zoning use in the UDO. And you can see as we're getting ready to dive a little bit deeper into the prescribed conditions that these proposed prescribed conditions, because of that hybridization, really lean heavily and mirror very closely the prescribed conditions that we also have for that light industrial use, but in this instance adapted to this new use for research and development with light industrial. So I know I've said a lot to this point. I'll pause here just briefly and momentarily to let everybody have an opportunity to review these first 3 bullet points with regard to more detail on those prescribed conditions. So this is the first half of those prescribed conditions, to which I just went over the overview for. And then this would be kind of the back half, or the second half of those prescribed conditions. Again, very much mirroring the existing prescribed conditions that we have for light industrial as a use in the UDO. And I know this is a lot to digest in probably a compressed time frame for everybody during the course of this meeting, but this is something that we can share out with you all to let you review with a little bit more time and provide a little bit more critical thought to it, and circle back to staff with some feedback or questions that you may have. And then, so addition to that introduction of that new use, R&D with an industrial component, and some prescribed conditions for that use, the thinking is that with this approach, that there are just a few more minor tweaks that we want to accomplish. And one is adding that term life sciences to our existing research and development definition. Now, this would still be its own use with its own definition and prescribed conditions in the UDO, we just want to be very clear that we also want to encourage life science development should it desire to locate in the city of Charlotte, and that's something that we want to encourage. But in this instance, it may be that they want to come here and just not have a light industrial component. We want to be very forward and say, yes, life sciences is welcome. And so that's why we've added that term to our existing use definition. And then lastly, because of this approach, just updating a few of the purpose statements in our OFC and RC zoning districts. And you can see here for the OFC district, we already had some language that referred to some light assembly uses. And because of this pivot in the light industrial components, we're proposing to just change that to say some light industrial components rather than just assembly. Again, kind of tying it all together and closing that loose thread and being very, very deliberate about what we're trying to encourage. In the RC campus, making a slight adjustment because it didn't have a prior reference, that because of this framework and this new use that that use locating in the RC district, that the RC district may also have some campuses or uses that may include some light industrial components. And I think with that was the last slide I had on the substance of the update. And so with that, we'll kind of pause here and then open up to you all as our UAC for any feedback and discussion that you may have.
Kevin, I do see one question in the chat from Andrew, and it says, can you elaborate on the allowance for increased square footage when older structures are incorporated? Is there a time frame for maintaining the use of existing structures? And would this invite increasing square footage only to tear down and replace if that older structure is determined as obsolete a few years later?
It's a good question, Andrea. Laura, do you have any insights on that, or is there anything that you can add? I'm sorry.
I would just say, I think we've, to be honest, been pretty neutral on new buildings versus existing buildings. Certainly, we'd like to see people be able to use existing buildings, and I don't know if that's something to think about, maybe a little bit of a bonus with that. But right now, we really are, again, pretty neutral on that. It's really based on what your uses are and a limitation in certain districts on the light industrial just because of their existing character.
Be patient, everybody. I've got a lot that I'm looking at here, but I see a couple of raised hands.
I'm picking up some hands for you. Don't worry. And Faith, also, if you want to call out if any folks have hands up as well, please feel free. But I think I see Rob and Eric. So Rob, if you want to go ahead and jump in, then we'll get to Eric.
Thank you. Just a quick question about the numbers, the distances, the percentages, things like that. Where did that, I guess, what's the justification for those numbers? Where did those come from?
Yeah, good question, Rob. And again, this is an initial framework. It's something that was, again, borrowed heavily from light industrial. So, if you were to look in the UDO and look at the prescribed conditions for light industrial, you'll probably see that there's a lot of mirroring there. That's not to say that this initial framework that we're putting forward today is the final version that'll go forward through the process. I'll tell you that, we're still vetting it. We're vetting it with you guys here today. I've shared this with our economic development department, and I'm trying to get some feedback from them. So it's a great question. Again, it really comes from trying to do this the easiest and the simplest and cleanest way possible. And so right now, those are the starting points, but that's not necessarily where it'll end up because we're still going through the vetting.
Thank you.
Eric, and then we've got Joseph. Yeah, sorry, Faith, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. I had just stepping back a little bit because especially for the research campus, because by the very definition, it's researching new things. Was there any discussion among staff about maybe switching the uses from what is allowed to what, allowing more types by default, and then putting in there what isn't allowed, so we could, we're not closing the opportunity for innovation or how things are fast, changing at a rapid pace, especially with technology like AI and other things like that that are coming, to not, lose out, like you opened today's discussion about opportunities of businesses and development happening and going outside of Charlotte.
Thank you for that, Eric. I will say that initially we felt, I think, as staff and as a city, that we had the language that we needed that would allow the flexibility. So as those maybe new technologies come forward, to perhaps give zoning administration or land development or even developers leeway within the construct of the current ordinance to still pursue what it was that they were proposing. Um, it's just in this particular instance, this was a gap. And so my response to you would be is I understand that. And I think we're trying to be as flexible as possible without too much prescription. to, and we're coming from a starting place where we felt we had that, but we lacked clarity on this specific issue, which is why it might seem so pointed. And we haven't shifted and pivoted to like an approach that you're suggesting.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
really, Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've really just added industrial to some districts in effect by creating this new use, so that these districts will have all the uses they had before,
Right.
plus some industrial, which is what we'd heard repeatedly from the development community, that was kind of the barrier. May hear different barriers as you guys move forward, but
I would agree with that.
Um,
I would say that the challenge has been there didn't seem to be the flexibility as needed to allow current technologies or maybe even potential future technologies to come forward if it had a light industrial component, which is why this is so focused on introducing and enabling that component in the framework of the existing uses.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like some districts had elements of each use, but not everything under that, you might see on one of those campuses. Like we might have allowed office, or research, but if you did research, you couldn't then manufacture the product in the same campus area or same site. So it was kind of trying to figure out how to put all of them in, one under one kind of umbrella in different districts, because there were elements of all of it throughout the ordinance, but it just wasn't cohesive to where you could say, all right, I can do it all in these districts. And that's what made it a challenge. I think that's what we're trying to get to. And it seems like, Kevin, that's kind of what we've tried to categorize here.
Yes, that's fair. Joseph, it looks like you
Yeah,
have your hand up.
yes. So in terms of this type of process, I'm thinking about placement. I actually was raised in a neighborhood that was just like 2 or 3 miles from Research Triangle Park in Durham. So I know seems like it's a broader scope. So question one is probably a quick yes or no question. I live near University Research Campus. So is it safe to assume that this would that area doesn't have that light industrial component added to it right now, and this will open that up to that area? And then on the other side, just like what do you have? I know this is probably more of an economic development question, but do you have any examples of how the city has been disadvantaged by not having this clarified language when it's battling, when it's competing for these types of R&D companies that want to do some of their manufacturing in the same area, when they're competing against other cities for those types of candidates?
Yeah, I don't know if we've got specific examples per se, but I know we've talked with, folks in the industry and folks that have tried to pull these projects together that have cited some of these challenges, that they're not sure what zoning is needed and if a rezoning would be required. And anytime you start getting down that path of uncertainty and entitlements and the timeline it might take to get something established and the clarity on what can and can't be done, those folks that are trying to put those deals together are at a disadvantage, because if you can go somewhere else that has everything in place, like a area outside Raleigh or Holly Springs or some other places where that really kind of have this, done in a clear fashion, then those folks are going to eliminate that time and uncertainty constraint and go right somewhere else. So I think that's been the constraint as folks try to put these together. They just know there's not a clear answer they can give on these prospective end users. And I think that's been the disadvantage. So, folks in the industry might have specific examples, but we kind of just hear the anecdotal examples that they give us in that regard. Kevin, I
Um,
don't know if you were going to add anything else, but please feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, no, to Joseph's first question about University City, yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that what we're proposing would, given the right place type and the right zoning, enable desired projects with a light industrial component. If it is appropriate for a property in the University City, yeah, this would allow that. With regard to specific examples, I'll just pick up after Dave and say, we've heard from certain folks in the development community that certainly this has been a challenge for the clients that have engaged them to try to locate a project here within our city. And I'll also tell you that, in conversations we've had with our economic development department, that they've identified this as a gap that needs addressing, because we are missing opportunities that are going to competing jurisdictions. Now, granted, I couldn't give you the names per se of certain developments, because as they come in, because they're applying for grants or initiatives or whatnot, they're always project code named something. So, but there's a list of maybe 10 that I'm aware of that economic development has given us as an example of things that have come forward seeking to utilize this, and either in the pipeline or ones that we've missed in the past.
Okay. And have they quantified to staff the a scale of like lost opportunity of jobs and of this amount worth this amount of money per year in salary, like they often do for when they're talking about advertising site selection victories. And then another, and this will be my last ask on this topic, I promise, because I know I can be very verbose on these things. So I'm just trying to get it all out of the way and then hit mute and listen. If there are any people on the call that are in the development side, architects, builders who work on the type of scale of projects that uh, uh, these changes will affect. I'd love some insight from you guys on just because I learned so much from hearing from you on how you feel like it will impact your projects and your customers' projects. But if that's not available by the moderator, I understand. But I definitely am interested in that question, that follow-up question, if that other ask for other developers to chime in isn't available.
Thanks, Joseph. With regard to your first question, I'm going to answer your question with a little bit of nuance, and that is to say that as far as I know, any metrics with regard to lost economic impact and or jobs, that's not necessarily something that I'm aware of that's been shared with planning staff. That said, that doesn't mean that they don't have those metrics and it's been shared with council or leadership or so on and so forth. It's just not been shared with planning staff. And with regard to your second comment, I think Nate's got his hand up, so it could be that he's fixing to give you some feedback on precisely what you had put out there as an ask.
Yeah. Hey, Joseph. I just reiterate what Kevin and Dave both said. If your only option is a rezoning because of a specific use or type of project, that turns off a large percentage of our clients because of the uncertainty in time frame, and then the amount of money you have to spend to tie up land with that uncertainty. So it's really, when you're not entitled to do something, it dissuades a lot of projects from happening.
Thank you for that, Nate. I appreciate that.
I'm sorry, I do have just one quick piece of feedback there that just popped in my head. Just due to just a project that I'm working on in my neighborhood, I'm learning more and more about the intentions of tree canopy. So I would love to see, make sure if it's not already being done in the UDO ways to, um, where it's applicable, like I would say, like the Atrium campus, there's opportunities for public use of, their spaces or things that they can do to enhance some of the areas around where they're building. And I think they've participated in that kind of thing. Um, but just things like where University Research Park, there's a significant number of trees. A lot of them are probably about to come down with the bridge from J.W. Clay going over. It would be nice to figure out ways to preserve as much of that canopy as possible. But understand we also need this kind of economic development. It really turned around. It really made it like it. Research, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill are what they are today because of that park. And so I'm in support of anything that makes it easier to develop these types of projects, just with the nuance of as much as possible using opportunities to contribute trees to for future public use or tree canopy, those sort of things. So, and I don't know how that would be combined in a planning effort, but I just think that's important to consider.
We understand, Joseph. Thank you for those comments. Roger, I think it's Roger.
I'm on this topic now,
I'm
I
sorry.
promise.
Very well, Joseph. Roger, I think that's you, Roger. Do you have your hand up? I've seen you've come off mute, but I don't hear anybody. Or, excuse me, I don't hear you. Um, is anybody else hearing Roger? No. Sorry, Roger. Maybe check your technology. We're not reading you on this side. And certainly we can circle back to you if we need to. Is there anybody else before I pivot this back to Dave to jump into our second topic? All right. Very good, Dave. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to you for our next discussion topic.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. So we've been working through some different opportunities for some additional affordable housing tools. I think back in December and even prior to that, we've been discussing ways to try to facilitate some affordable housing outcomes, particularly through some faith-based organizations. One item we were looking at was trying to come up with some by right scenarios for creating housing on land owned by faith-based organizations. And we started to explore some different examples through some different cities and different places across the country that have been doing that, and found that there is kind of a couple different paths that places have taken, and some have been straight ordinance amendments where they allow something like this to occur by right under prescribed conditions. There's some places that have enacted state legislation that requires jurisdictions to facilitate those types of projects because it's become essentially a enabling legislative law. So that states like California have some of that written into their state legislation. And then we found other cities do also have a process where they go through individual rezonings for these types of outcomes. And the more we talked through some of the challenges and opportunities with an approach of a by right scenario, in some regards, the challenges, particularly with the landscape we're in now with Senate Bill 382 and not being able to really roll out amendments and then maybe make some tweaks and adjustments as we learn from them, creates a little bit of a challenging landscape for us to do something just by right universally across the board. So when we learned that some other places did adopt a rezoning approach, we thought that may be a good approach for us to take to work with different organizations. And I will say in talking with folks on our legal side, we've got to look a little bit beyond just faith-based organizations, and probably have to consider maybe some community organizations or nonprofits that may also want to do, a similar type of project on land that they may own. So we're looking a little bit beyond just that faith-based organization. They certainly will be a big component of that, and I think could be a big uh, uh, contributor to those outcomes of providing some affordability. But we did think the rezoning process that we've seen some other jurisdictions take on could be a good tool for us to implement for a few different reasons that we'll talk through here. So if we can jump on to the next slide. So what we were considering would be essentially a city-sponsored, not city-led, but city-sponsored rezoning program where a petitioner could come forward and for this purpose, we'll use the example of, let's say, a faith-based organization or some other nonprofit, and they could come to us and say, hey, we want to take some of our property and contribute to developing some workforce housing or affordable housing on this and they would be the petitioner. We would be the sponsor of it. So it would be similar to how we've done historic districts and historic overlays and some of the residential overlays that we've looked at and considered. And, although some of those are held up a little bit again by 382, that's an approach that we've taken in the past. And what that means is essentially the petitioner, whoever that may be, is still responsible for all the things that the rezoning would entail, which is the community meetings, representing that petition to city council, submitting all the required documents. The city sponsored side of it would essentially absorb the cost of that under this pilot program. And we would walk them through from that side and provide, the same level of support we do for any other petition, but we would absorb that cost as being kind of the sponsor of that. And some of the trade-off for that is going to be that to participate, we're going to have that be a tier 1 conditional. So it would start out as that notes only kind of plan where they would just have some commitments to some different site conditions. One of those being affordability. So if we can jump to the next slide. The specifics for some of those, applicable districts, we're going to target the N2 districts, A, B, and C. That doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't be another district if we've got a piece of property that's in, let's say, a neighborhood center, that we would, if that neighborhood center district would work and that's aligned with the policy map, certainly we would, always prefer to have that alignment take place. So we would work under that kind of context. The conditions that we would probably have as far as just a template standard conditions for any of these folks that would participate in this type of pilot program would be, commitment to some number of percent of units provided at an affordable rate, an AMI percentage, the length of the affordability period. There would certainly be notes about ensuring that compliance and delivery of those throughout the life cycle of the project. And then other applicable conditions, there might be some need for additional buffering. There might be a need to cap building height. There might be a need to cap the type of use. Some sites may be conducive to, a small multifamily apartment building. Some may only be really good and well suited for some single family attached townhomes or triplexes. So, those would be tailored to, some of the site constraints and site needs, but essentially we would start with a kind of set of standardized conditions that we would work with, our partners in Housing Neighborhood Services. We certainly have some guidelines in the UDO administration manual on, how that can be structured and set up from, the start of the project through the life cycle of it. So we certainly would be working with them to get those put in place. So if somebody did come forward and say, hey, I want to take part in this program, we would start out and say, okay, these are the blanket conditions. We can tweak them and massage them and add to them as we need to based on, the unique features of the site and the context of it. But we would always start from the same spot on all of those. Next slide. So essentially the benefits for this, again, is for us to absorb that cost barrier. That is something that we always hear is kind of that first kind of hurdle that folks run into when they're considering this type of project. We would expedite these petitions that would go forward, to a hearing within 2 months of submittal. Typically, that's a 3 to 4 month window. So we would shorten that. That would essentially mean that you could complete a process within 90 days. That's of course best case scenario. You never know what kind of community concerns or other concerns you may run into that could extend that out, but that would be the target, to get it to a hearing in 2 months and then hopefully get through that decision in the next month, which is again about a 90 day window, which is shorter than most standard petitions. And what we'll learn from a lot of this is the hope is as we go through this program and use this as somewhat of a pilot, if we start to see how the conditions begin to work or don't work, or things that we need to tweak or modify as we kind of learn from, hopefully the handful of petitions we get to do this, that could help us inform some of the prescribed conditions or other ways to do this on more of a by right scenario, after we get done with running this pilot for, let's say, 6 to 8 months. So it's going to kind of be a research tool a little bit for us as well, which again, given the landscape of Senate Bill 382, I think that gives us enough of a platform to get a good understanding to potentially roll out a text amendment at a later date and feel confident in it that we won't necessarily have to make significant changes to it. That could be, limited if that bill is still in place. And so it's going to be somewhat of a research time frame for us as well to really gather info and learn before we put a text amendment together. And we may also learn that we don't get a lot of participants, so we'll have to kind of reevaluate then. We could learn that this process actually is working out well and it stays in place but gets modified a little bit. So essentially that window and going through this as a pilot program will be a very much of a learning exercise for us to inform how we can improve it and maybe do it more universally. Next slide. So, we've got some next steps. We still need to continue working with our partners in Housing and Neighborhood Services to, come up with those good conditions that everybody could kind of work through and have as a standard template across the board, review and outline some previous faith-based organization housing development rezonings, which we've seen a couple, and then discuss any kind of subdivision and permitting implications down with land development. We'd also like to create some outreach materials that would outline how folks could participate in this and provide that both through us and provide that through our partners in Housing and Neighborhood Services as well. We also would like to start to come up with a little bit of a good kind of criteria as to, who can take part in this program. Again, this is really targeted at folks that want to provide this outcome, but maybe need a little bit of assistance and don't have the, anywhere from $6,000 to $10,000 to go through a conditional rezoning. So that's why we're really focused on those faith-based and nonprofits, other folks that are community-based organizations that may want to contribute to this, affordable housing initiative, but just need a little bit of that assistance and see that financial barrier on the front end as being something that holds them up. So the next slide. So yeah, that's a lot for us to talk through. But again, this is something that is not a regulatory tool. So it's a little bit unique that we're back talking through this with y'all, but we've talked about it in a regulatory sense for a couple months. We did shift a little bit of that thinking after doing some additional research and just wanted to put this in front of y'all as the direction that we are planning to go in and continuing to work with. Seems to be general support for us through on our side and through our leadership, as well as talking with some of our partners again in housing. We would, if everybody's feels like we've got everything in order, hopefully over the next month, by the end of March, we'd like to start to talk about this a little bit more with council and get some guidance from them, and then hopefully roll this out sometime in April, and then keep it in place through the end of this year. So that would give us about 8 months to go through this and see what kind of outcomes and results that we get. So with that, I see hands going up, and we will start to take some questions and conversation. So I don't know who was first, but
Yeah, I think it was Shamaya, if you want to jump in with your comments or questions.
Sure. So there are a couple of things, two different topics. The first one is I've been a part of this advisory board for quite some time now. And although I'm not always able to make the calls, one of the things that I thought about last night actually was, how is our feedback being tracked? How is it being communicated out? Because I feel like there's a lot of education that takes place in terms of what the city is doing. But I'm not really sure if the feedback that I've given, how is it being communicated back out? Like, are we giving them this Zoom call and asking them to listen to what we say, or that sort of a thing? The next part of this is I'm very encouraged by what I see in terms of this piece because the organization that I work for provides affordable housing, and we don't make any money. A lot of times we're in the negative trying to do it. And there are some places where we're going to be trying to expand our footprint. The thing that I do want to sort of put out there is I don't want, for me, it seems like the barrier is how much affordable housing you can provide versus supporting smaller affordable housing developers and landlords. So I just want to make sure that within this plan, we don't do stuff like say, okay, well, you have to be expanding out to 25 units or 100 units or whatever, that it truly is open to people who are doing the work and who are willing to make the sacrifices to provide affordable housing. So that's
Yeah.
my initial feedback on that.
And I'll say to your second point, there's really no intention to limit, an outcome in terms of number of units, or say you have to have a minimum type of unit, or number of units, or a maximum. It would be based on what the site could accommodate. We'll have to think of it in a contextual sense. We don't want to just add a 65-foot tall apartment building where it's nothing but low rise 1-story single family homes. But I think there's we're not anticipating a unit cap or a density cap on these types of projects. The goal is really to, just provide the ability for folks to pursue a project like this in a little bit of a quicker time frame without maybe some of that upfront cost that might deter them. And then the rest of it would sort of get worked out as it goes through the process and then gets into the permitting side of things. Our goal is to really just help the entitlement side of it get the site ready for a project like this and ensure that we do get some affordability outcome. And then the rest would just be up to the site designers and the folks in permitting to work it through and understand what they could fit under the existing zoning and under whatever site constraints they may have. As to your first question, I'm not sure I quite follow, but I think you're asking how do we get this feedback back out to folks. I don't. Are you referring to like council or our committees or staff? I just want to clarify so I can maybe try to answer it in a better way.
Sure. Okay. So the thought process is if I'm a part of an advisory committee, then I'm lending my advice in terms of how the United Development Ordinance should progress and move forward. But it's not always clear to me how the feedback that I'm giving is actually articulated.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think
I
for
apologize.
us, no, it's a good question. I think for us, I know when we go through these exercises and conversations with y'all, we're constantly listening, obviously taking notes, going back and rewatching to make sure that we've heard what some of the challenges or some of the concerns or some of the insight you guys provide, and try to work those into the language that we put together or the concepts we put together to develop any text amendments. So when we hear feedback about, even what we talked about earlier on the research campuses, the square footages, are they enough? Are they derived from a place of, that's based in, the reality of the actual industry that's pursuing these things? We do, make sure that we go back and ask ourselves those same questions as we're developing, that language that we're trying to put together and incorporate, what we've heard from y'all and what we've heard from, council and other stakeholders to try to balance, all the different interests and put together something that addresses it in a way that, comes out with everybody's, best interests in mind. It doesn't mean we always answer it to everybody's, best desired outcome, but we do try to understand all the input we're given and find that balance that, we can do to, make it as, I guess, as accommodating as we can to all viewpoints.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Matt, I've got you next if you want to jump in.
All right, thanks. Real quick, I think this is a terrific idea, and I love it. One of the things that I was thinking about as Dave was talking through it, I see sites where churches are letting go of their land for redevelopment and things like that. And I'm curious if these proposals have linkages between the parent organization and the housing, if there ought to be some sort of separate the question is, if the religious facility were to, you know, dwindle or do something that caused them to not be there any longer, you've got residents potentially in these homes. Is there some sort of backstop that ought to exist in the event that that parent entity um, wasn't able to keep doing what they're doing?
So are you essentially, if a church is, let's say they're the developer of a site, or another nonprofit is the developer of a site, and they no longer are a part of it, or they go belly up, or they, decide they want to move off and shut down their operations, but the housing side of it is still there. Is
Exactly.
that what you're, I think
Yeah.
what we, I think that's why there'll be some level of enforcement, for lack of a better term, and making sure that it's maintained no matter who, the owner operator is. I do think the ones we've seen have been subdivided out essentially, and an actual developers come in, and it's not the entity that owned the land. Essentially, they've provided somebody else to do the project, and they've kind of absolved themselves of ownership, which I think that's primarily what we've seen. But I think what you're getting at is should be addressed through that level of uh, commitments to ensure that if you're providing, let's say, 20% of the units at 80% AMI for 30 years, that's going to stay in place no matter who the owner or operator is. And that would just be part of the site conditions that would run with, the land for the entitlements to that site, whether it's, whoever the developer is or whoever the owner is next year or 10 years from now.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it was just something that came to mind while you were presenting. That's all.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
Nate, you want to jump in? Well, Nate's hand went down, and I'm not hearing him.
Sorry.
Oh, hear you now.
So yeah, I agree with everything Matt said. It's a great solution. So just to confirm, Dave, this is only intended for churches or nonprofits like the Red Cross, and not, as an example, not a nonprofit affordable housing developer.
No, I think what we were, and I had a good candid conversation with Therese yesterday. For those of you who don't know, Therese, our city attorney that represents our department, and we did want to roll this out and just focus on faith-based organizations. She had some hesitancy in that, which, after talking through it with her, certainly understand. We don't want to, from a land use perspective on our side, we can't really get into parsing that out. So let's say we've got somebody, like you said, like the Red Cross, or even a landowner like the West Side Land Trust that may have vacant land that they want to pursue a project like this. I think that's where we would have to be a little bit more accommodating, and she didn't want us to kind of get too into one lane of, saying this is only open to faith-based organizations. So we'd have to look at other nonprofits. We'd have to look at other community-based organizations. I will say, I don't think the intent of this is for, a large scale, like market rate developer that just wants to add a level of affordability to their project. I think we're trying to, facilitate this on those outcomes for folks that are, that truly need a little bit of that assistance on the front end. Doesn't mean we're probably not going to be able to consider that type of thing, particularly as we get into more of an expedited time frame. That's maybe where we could accommodate, a larger developer that wants to go through something like this. But our goal, I think, was to look at some of those smaller organizations that want to deliver this, but see that first financial step of rezoning as a barrier. But to your point, I think we would have to be open to, other entities that aren't just faith-based organizations. Let's say, even if another nonprofit, like I said, had an opportunity they wanted to pursue, I think, we're going to be obliged to listen and see what kind of help we can offer with this program.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because you have Dream Key and Living, you have nonprofit affordable
Yeah.
housing. developers, you also have affordable housing developers that are not nonprofit that still use the Housing Trust Fund. Just some again, I think that helped me. And then two other follow-ups. Any reason why you're not considering N1 for the small infill type projects that might be duplex, triplex for sale with some
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we certainly can. If somebody wanted to, let's just say they wanted to do, nothing but some triplexes and N1D would accommodate them, but they're N1A, certainly. I don't think there's a zoning district that would accommodate a residential outcome that we wouldn't consider. I think when we put this presentation together, our thought was a lot of the ones we've seen so far have been like N1 to N2A. To accommodate, a larger unit count or a larger, unit count within a building. But yeah, if somebody wanted to come in and said, hey, we want to go just to N1E and that will suit our needs. Yeah, I think that's more than reasonable for us as well. Like we're not going to shut down a district that could work if it works for, the folks that are bringing this type of project forward.
Gotcha. And then last question, would you preclude it's conditional, but you didn't mention EX. If it had to go EX, would you preclude that?
Well, that was, and I'll say this as well. That's why we added N2C to the list, because as you're aware, N2C is really the only just kind of residential based district that would allow an EX. So I think that is something that we did, have in the back of our minds that somebody might need that, and we need to come up with have a district on hand that could accommodate it. So that N2C certainly would be probably the lowest intensity district that accommodates an EX provision. Certainly the affordability outcome could be one of the benefits. We'd have to work on what the other may be. But we did think through that, and that's why N2C was kind of added to that list, just to make sure that we had that in our back pocket.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
Before we go forward, and I want to say, Eric, Joe, Ruth, I see you got your hands up, and we'll get to you in just a minute. I do want to pivot just briefly, though, to some comments that came into the chat, and I want to recognize Andrea. Andrea has put a question in chat with regard to this initiative. Are there other cities with similar experimental programs or lessons learned?
We have seen, and I think I will call on maybe Faith to say what I think what we looked at that kind of prompted this path was, I believe it was Portland. Faith, correct me if I'm wrong. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to meet or talk with Faith on the phone or email yet, Faith Zisk is one of our newest members of the entitlement services team. She is joining us and will be working on a lot of different things, including the UDO. So she's been with us now for about going on 2 months. And she's been helping put a lot of this together. But Faith, I don't know if you want to highlight any of the things that you learned doing some research, particularly on this side of the topic.
Can you hear me, Dave?
Mm-hmm.
Andrea, thank you for your question. And Dave, thank you for the introduction. My research, I did not see any experimental programs. And as Dave mentioned earlier, some of the initiatives were actually state-led. And so some cities were required to include text amendments to their existing land use and zoning code. So for example, Washington State passed a law that required including faith-based organizations to have access to affordable housing. And so Seattle was required to update their land use code to include the opportunity for affordable housing on faith-based organization land. So it seems as though most folks are kind of, based off of the research I did, either it's coming top down to cities, or there were some cities that, so in California, for example, there was a city, it might have been Pasadena, that passed its own ordinance, and it included requirements for affordable housing on faith-based organization land. However, the feedback that they actually got from the public was that it didn't go far enough. And then pretty soon thereafter, California passed at the state level, a requirement for this kind of program. So it seemed as though there weren't all that many experimental programs, maybe that Pasadena one, and even it seemed as though that feedback from their constituents and the affordable housing development community there said that didn't go far enough. So maybe that's a lesson learned. However, also as Dave mentioned, we are potentially working through that Senate bill. So that's part of the reason, we're looking at this other option of this rezoning option. Did I cover that, Dave?
Yeah, thanks,
And
Dave, for
Andrea,
that.
did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I think it was being just.
Oh, you're frozen. Or is she frozen for everyone?
Yeah. And I
Okay.
think she had another follow-up question about place types and connectivity, public
Mm,
transport factor in opening
mhm.
this to all districts. So I don't think we would open this to all districts. Again, we're looking at primarily the residential districts of, N2. If N1 works, great. If it's in an activity center, we would probably look to, just kind of have some understanding of any limitation on uses to just residential. But I think from that standpoint, yeah, we certainly are going to look at, do they have access to transit and transportation options and, proximity activity centers like we do for all rezonings. I think generally for this, though, is furthering that goal of adding to our affordable housing outcomes and initiatives is certainly going to be, one of the primary outcomes and goals that we see trying to move some of these things forward. But, certainly we want to make sure that they're the intensity matches, what some of the capacity is in the areas that they're looking to rezone. So, we're certainly don't want to see, really dense, intense project where there may be limitations on transit options and proximity to goods and services. So we'll have to kind of walk through and figure out what the best outcomes are and tailor, the approach to the site and the context around it. So I think that's why we're going to start with a base set of conditions, and then they can be tweaked and modified to then further accommodate the actual context and location that we're looking at.
Thank you, Dave. Eric, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, thank you. I know Dave, you just answered, and Nate's question kind of answered this, but just some clarification. So the slide that says specific zoning rezoning applications, to me, the way I read it was that it would only be, for neighborhood 2 districts, but it seems like it could be open to any neighborhood 1 uh, district that would like to go to a neighborhood 2A, B, or C, correct? Is that what the rezoning would allow?
Yeah, I think our general thought was that most of these would probably start out. We have a lot of locations. Again, a lot of our research was based initially on faith-based organizations. We've kind of pivoted a little bit and opened that up
Right.
to some broader thought. That really happened in some conversations yesterday. So our initial thought was a lot of those places were already zoned like N1A or N1B, and to order to make the projects necessarily pencil out, they would need to go up to an N2 to get more units. But again, if it
Right.
works within an N1 district and they just need to go up some intensity within that N1 category, that would be great. Uh, and the thought also is that if folks already have this N2 zoning on their property, they may not need to do anything, and they may just be able to do this with just some education and putting the right pieces together on the the development side of things. So our thought was it would really be geared to those places that have just an N1 zoning and need to go up to some level of intensity. So our mind initially went to N2, but Nate brought
Okay.
up a good point of there could be N1 districts that could accommodate something as well, and we're open to that.
Understand that. And then the last bullet point, I believe you're talking about the policy map, right? When you talk about place types.
Let's see, where can we go up to that
Yeah.
slide?
And I believe that's what you're getting at there. I think that would be a great way for the public and the residents to understand where this could go. I know it's going to be happening on a case by case basis now, going with the
Yeah,
city guiding the way, right? So it's okay. It's just trying to figure out, like, if the community is agreeing that this policy map makes sense, and it might be an N1C today, but it is already planned at some point to go to N2, that those should kind of be an easy guideline for everybody to follow. just
Yeah,
using that.
and I think we'll, certainly look to try to stay, we always like to try to be consistent with the policy map. We also recognize that in some of these instances, we may, see a little bit of that disconnect between, an area that might be N1, but in order to accommodate the outcome and, still facilitate a goal of the overall plan, which is increasing our,
Yep.
affordability outcomes, is that a reasonable, is that a reasonable change on the policy map to just increase the intensity to that site just to achieve a goal that is, I think, a little bit broader reaching than the colors on the actual map. But again, as Andrea pointed out, we've got to make sure that we're putting it in the right place and that folks do still have access to the things they need
Great.
to function in those types of housing options. So putting it in the right place is still going to be, paramount in that decision making, but we certainly understand there might be some disconnects and inconsistencies on that, but we'll have to weigh the benefit of the outcome of affordability against that and the location and all of that, like we would normally do for,
Okay.
a typical rezoning.
And one other piece that I think you mentioned in answering the last question, I think wasn't Andrew's question, but I think is I would like to state that, rethinking this. So I think you mentioned if this is occurring in an activity center, that you would make sure it just had the residential component only. At least that's what I thought I heard you say. And I would just push back saying that we we wouldn't want to lose opportunity to activate the ground if it is an activity center. It makes sense that you want to have the retail component or
Yeah, yeah,
services component in that ground floor. And maybe it could be also affordable as well if that could work out,
yeah, certainly. I
regardless. But
think
I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree, and I probably didn't communicate that as effectively as I could. I think what I was thinking, we, would at least have that residential outcome assured. But if, yeah, they wanted to do ground floor retail, there were other components of the site they wanted to program for uses that, got activity center outcomes. I think we're certainly all for that. We just want to make sure that that programming is, focused on that residential outcome. And then if there's other, elements they want to make sure they can accommodate long term over the site, certainly we'd be open to that and make sure that that activity center can be what
Okay.
it aspires to be.
Thank you, Dave, for clarifying. And
Yeah.
sorry if I misunderstood your
No,
answer.
I wasn't clear, so thank you for bringing that back up, Eric.
Joseph, get on in here.
So I've I spent a little time. I had a meeting with a builder at the beginning of the month, and just to kind of get an idea just of some key obstacles that often get in the way of these types of uh, affordable housing projects, whether it be a market rate product or anything like that. And one of the things that they said is like sometimes like there are like they a site plan gets submitted and then their follow up from specific departments, like maybe a civil engineering concern comes back that prescribes the need to build a city street, which that pretty much wrecks the opportunity. So I think figuring out ways to offset that, because I really was pleased with the idea that you're covering rezoning costs. Would those types of follow-up costs, like any kind of civil engineering concerns or any other follow-up requirements that come back after all the parties involved, relevant parties involved, review the site plan from the city side, would the city be willing to, would there be some kind of way to offset those kind of costs too, that are like a new civil engineering study or something like that that adds significant cost to a project? That's my first question.
Yeah, this is primarily just focused on getting through the entitlement phase of things, just to get the site set up for, potential development of this type of project. But it's that there's a whole nother element to,
Okay.
permitting and all of that that it would be, a separate conversation. And I know there's been some talks
On
about
me.
trying to figure out how to make that process for affordable projects a little bit more efficient and nimble. But this is really primarily just focused on trying to get folks through that entitlement phase so they can get quicker to that side of it, and get into that part of it, which is, like I said, going to be separate from what we're talking about.
Okay, all
Yeah,
right.
and I'll just add in real quick to Dave alluded to it, but we've tried twice to get a federal grant to create an affordable housing center that would help fast track on the permitting side, affordable housing, as well as not just for faith-based organizations, but a broader lens of that. We've done that in partnership with Housing and Neighborhood Services. And we're still focused on finding the funding to do that, to create an expedited team and to have navigators that would help developers navigate all of the different challenges and of process and make sure that people understand the process and how to make it easier. So this pilot program is kind of on the front end of that and could potentially help that. But we have yet to get funding to stand up the center. And like I said, we just found out about a month ago that we didn't receive the federal grant the second time that we applied for it. And so anyways, it is something we're highly interested in and are working to find funding to make things easier. That wouldn't necessarily be to fund civil engineers to design projects, but more on the things that we can control, such as like process and permitting and how quickly all of that takes. And so and also treat, anyways, we're working on several different tracks, but I just wanted to make mention that that is something we have been working on.
Okay. So what I'll just on my notes on that, I'll just say keep pursuing the federal grant as you see relevant. And I guess any other concerns would be that I have sound like they speak to something I should talk to Housing and Neighborhood Services about on the permit, anything related to permitting I should be reaching out to Housing and Neighborhood Services about is what I'm understanding.
No, well, we do the permitting and planning. I'm saying we affordable housing permitting. We have been collaborating with
Gotcha.
Housing and Neighborhood Services on what a program would look like to fast track and expedite
Okay.
affordable housing. So if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can connect you with the right people.
Actually,
Okay.
it's a I'm sorry, this is Kevin. I'm going to jump in, and actually, Monica and Joseph's comments are probably a pretty good segue to welcome into the conversation and give a little introduction to Ruth Ippolito, who actually is one of our Housing and Neighborhood Service teammates, and I know she's had her hand up for a while. So with that, Ruth, I'll pivot to you and welcome you into the conversation for your comments.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to thank my colleagues over in planning and zoning because we fully appreciate all the efforts and time you're putting in to drive this forward. I do apologize if Warren's already aware of this or I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I was just interested in what kind of timeline you're looking at of when you anticipate rolling out the incentives for the affordable housing perspective.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, and I caught up with Warren earlier this week. I think our goal is to try to come up with some template conditions for you guys to kind of look at in the next 2 weeks or so and respond to, and then work together to make sure that they make sense and are feasible, and then start to put all that in place over the next 2 weeks after. So we're hoping to get everything or in order by the end of the month of March, and at least have that framework in place that we can talk with council about and start to hopefully get this thing rolled out sometime in April. So then we give ourselves, like I said, a good 7-8 months of the pilot program to learn from. But we'll definitely be working with y'all over in probably about 2 weeks here to put something in front of everybody to respond to. And as we go, we'll certainly take this through for the folks on the UAC call, through probably our standard channels of council committees, whether that's TPD and maybe the housing committee, just to make sure everybody's aware. And, we'll make sure that this is something that folks are, well informed of, so that if people do start to come forward and approach, a design firm or approach, somebody, Ruth, on your side to say, hey, we want to pursue this and don't know where to start, this would be a good starting place and a program that you could offer to folks to start going down that path.
Oh, that's great. I do have a follow-up question with regards to kind of communicating it out to our partners and who it be applicable for. So I'm working with you like on a separate project with regards to the bite size communication strategy for the UDO. Do you think that there's some kind of synergy there where we can kind of bolt this element in to kind of
Yes.
like, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
absolutely. I think one of the things we had highlighted on one of the final slides was as we were trying to work on some collateral just on all the housing tools in the UDO, we'd put something together specific to this kind of pilot program as well, to, just to highlight this as another element. So whether that's just a quick one-page handout to give to folks to understand what this process would be and how they can be a part of it and what kind of commitments they would be expected to make through it. We certainly want to put some collateral together for that. Uh, does that get to your question there, Ruth?
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And I think, Nate, you had a question about what's the, benefit to folks. I think really, yeah, the benefit is the time frame, the absorption of cost on our side, and just getting it through in a pretty quick and efficient process. I mean, certainly if somebody doesn't want to, they want to do something that's, maybe not committing to an AMI percentage, or, they don't want to commit to a certain level of affordability, they can certainly just go through the process on their own, and, either do that conventionally or conditionally, however they would pursue it just as a standard rezoning. This would really be the trade-off of the time frame and the cost with the, the return of getting, some level of affordability commitment to it. That would be, what we're looking at as the benefit. But yeah, folks want to pursue this and don't want to necessarily pigeonhole themselves into, an affordability commitment, then they would have to just go through the standard rezoning process on that side.
Dave, there is one more question in the chat. I'm not sure if we have time for it or not.
Yeah,
Um,
certainly.
Nate is wanting to understand some other benefits.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I was just talking through.
Okay.
Yep,
Cool.
sorry.
Awesome.
And yes, Douglas, we found that terminology as well. That's, we've got we didn't realize that there was a YIGBY terminology. So we learned that through this process. So thank you for sharing that also. Good to see you today.
Always happy to come hang out with you all.
Yes, always happy to have you. Other questions, other comments? It's like we said, we can start to formulate some of this, and as we get through it, I'm certainly happy to share some of it with y'all just through email as well, just to give you guys some direct materials that we're working through and that we're putting together. So once things are, I think, in good shape, we can certainly share that out here and welcome some additional comments just through emails or just conversations outside of just this general forum. I think if we go into some next upcoming topics, Kevin, our next slide, we've got some, as Monica had mentioned, we're going to start to roll into more of a maintenance type of schedule for text amendments. So rather than having, a bunch of different ones coming on, the calendar at different times of the year, we're trying to get into a cycle of combining some of the maintenance needs with some of the bigger needs that we, certainly need, to address. Some of the upcoming things we're working on are some updates to ADU standards, trying to, again, figure out ways we can further streamline and make things a little bit more clear so we can try to get more of those types of units built throughout the city. We do want to come back and just refine and give you guys some final feedback on where we landed with converting office to residential. And then we do have some updates, and we've talked about multiple frontage sites at some recent meetings. I think with TPD most recently, we certainly are getting close to having all that ready to put in front of y'all just to continue to chew on. We may submit some of that to you guys via email and just ask for some feedback that way. We do anticipate we may need to circle back and have another quick huddle up with you guys maybe sometime in later March if we have more topics to kind of go through before we file in April. I know there's some pending stormwater text amendments that I'm not sure how technical they would be if they're really kind of in the weeds on the technical side of things. We may not be something we want to share in great detail, but at least give you guys a heads up on those. And then there's some other topics we've got to cover before we file an amendment in April. We certainly may put something back on the calendar with y'all, but I think that's something that we'll continue to try to figure out over the next week or two as we finalize that list of things that will go into that April amendment. So that's where things are. Just a quick update on our favorite Senate Bill 382 topic. I know there's a lot of folks that have been following that. Just so y'all know, there's been lots of bills filed, both county specific and also statewide, that are looking to essentially reinstate the ability for cities and counties to initiate, rezonings that could be considered down zoning. So essentially getting that authority back into city and counties' hands. So again, there's lots of bills that have been filed on behalf of different counties and different jurisdictions across the state, but there's also one that seems to be more of a universal attempt to do that statewide, and that's House Bill 24. So keep an eye on those as they continue through the process. I think our understanding is we'll know a little bit more about them around the month of May, early May, when they start to begin to move forward a little bit on that side. But there have been a lot of things filed, even as recently as this week, that are looking to get that bill cleaned up and essentially restore it back to the way it was. So, we'll see how that transpires, but just wanted to give you all a quick update because I know a lot of y'all have been following that topic. And I think that's all we've got for today. So if there's anything else for the greater good of the group, we're certainly still have a few minutes. Otherwise, we'll turn everybody loose for some lunch and hopefully get outside and enjoy what looks to be another nice winter, spring afternoon.
As always, I make my pitch to reduce parking requirements where possible and effective to do so. I think it could possibly even help with some the right projects on these affordable housing. You could get more out of a property, especially if you're the ones that would mix commercial and residential. If we had a way to reduce parking requirements, but I know that's an uphill battle. But I'm always going to push for it.
Certainly, we hear you. Thank you.
Alan, we'll miss you. I don't know who I'll call the bug, but we will miss you.
Let's see who. Well, Kevin's got enough on his plate, so don't call Kevin.
Okay, Kevin, you're my new best friend, buddy.
So long as you bring some,
just keep calling Alan.
Yeah, keep calling Alan. Or you can bug me, but we're going to have to talk about Man City for a little bit too.
I know, and it's going to be a commiserating kind of adventure, isn't it? Yeah.
It kills me. It kills me, Douglas. Yeah. It kills me. Although not this season. Not as much this season. It doesn't kill me. So.
Dave.
That's all right. My Eagles won the Super Bowl, so I can't really say anything. I'm still riding high from that. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. I'm out.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll be in touch soon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.